Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is David Ebo, and I work at Microsoft on the Windows Azure website team. Not Windows Azure, Azure websites team, I'm sorry. This talk is titled Deep Dive into Hidden Gems, Tips and Tricks for Azure Website. It's quite a mouthful. The things that I'm trying to achieve in this session, first of all, wake you up, because I know it's a pretty early talk. It wasn't my first choice, but that's what they gave me. I'll show you a bunch of stuff which hopefully will get you excited about Azure websites. And also, we always welcome feedback, so I'd like to hear from you about what you like, what you dislike, what are good directions for us to go into, and such. So the first thing I'm going to discuss is the concept of staged deployment. So the traditional way of pushing bits to a website has two main issues. The first one is pretty obvious, is that you're pushing bits that you may have tried on your local machine, but you have not tried on Azure. So if you're pushing straight to production, you're taking a big chance. The second reason is a little less obvious. It's the fact that if you push bits into an existing app, especially when dealing with ASP.NET, where you're modifying files that are in a bin folder, it causes a recompilation of all the pages, an app domain restart, and all that stuff, and that can take 20 seconds, which you don't want in your production site. So the answer is to use a staging slot. So the basic diagram for that is pretty straightforward. You're the developer. You're pushing not to production, but to staging slot. You can push as many times as you want. I mean, by push, I mean deploy. When you're ready, you swap into production. But here, I'm actually going to show you a slightly more interesting workflow that involves continuous deployment from a GitHub repository. So in this model, what you have is one or many developers that are collaborating on a project on GitHub. So they work on their local machine. They push changes. As soon as they push to GitHub, those changes go live on the staging site. That can happen any number of times. It's low risk. And at any point that you feel that you have bits in staging that are worthy to put into production, it's a simple swap away. So I'll start by demoing this. So first a note, I am using the current portal and not the preview portal. The reason for that is that the integration with GitHub has not made it yet into the new portal. This will come in a bit. So let's go ahead and create a new site. I'll just call it Hello Build. So this site is going to be my production site. But the first thing I'll do when it's created is create a companion staging slot for it. So the way I do this is add a new deployment slot. I can name it whatever I want, but staging is as good a name as any other. And now it's creating this staging site. So now that I have my staging site, this is the one that I want to connect. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong side here. Hello build. Probably have too many sites. Set up deployment from source control, and I'm choosing GitHub. And what's happening here is there's an OAuth workflow. I don't need to authenticate because I've done this before on this machine. And it's giving me a list of all the repositories that I have. And the one I'll use for testing here is just some little default MVC app to which I made a few additional changes. But for all practical purposes, it's a brand new MVC app. So once I do that, it's setting up a relationship. So here we see that it's deploying. At the same time, I can show you if I go to the GitHub site and I go to settings here. How many of you are using GitHub in some form? OK, a bunch of you. So there is this concept of webhooks. And here we can see the reason I have two is there was an old site that was linked to it. But this Hello Build staging has a webhook. What that means that whenever anybody pushes to this site, it sends a notification to Azure. And we then fetch from that repository and build. So if we go back to here, the deployment is complete. So I can browse to the site. And at the same time, I'll also go back and browse to the production site so we can have them side by side. production site is still empty, and this one has the bits. Before I swap into production, I'll show you the motion if I want to make a change to this site. So I'm not going to get fancy. I'm just going to make like recognizable changes just so we can see. H1, build demo. And I'll just commit and push this change. There's, as many of you know, there is Git integration in Visual Studio. I personally just prefer the old-fashioned tool, so I use that. Nothing wrong with the VS integration. It's just personal choice. And I'll just commit and push. And the push here is I am not pushing to my Azure website. I'm pushing to GitHub, which will cause a new deployment to happen. So if I go back, so this is the production site, but if I go back to the staging site on the deployment page, we should see a new deployment happening. And in a few seconds, it should be done, and we'll have the change in our, this is production, this is staging. And here is our change. So now, suppose I didn't like that change. Within my staging slot, I actually have the ability to say redeploy this previous deployment. So I'm still completely within staging. I'm not swapping anything here. I'm just saying that within my staging site, I have redeployed the older version. So now this should disappear. And then I can go back and go forward here. And after that's done, we'll say, OK, we are happy enough with the site. We'd like to get it into production. So first, let's make sure it's back. And the way we do this is from the dashboard of either the staging site or the production site, you have this swap command. And we want to swap from staging to production. And the beauty is after I do that, very quickly, the site is up. So as you can see, there was absolutely no delay. That's because the site was already primed, and it's literally just switching DNS traffic from one to the other. So the next thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is this thing called Kudu, which Nir in this presentation yesterday called it the website's best-kept secret, but we've been talking about it enough that I'm not calling it the worst-kept secret. So what is Kudu? First, one concept that's interesting about Azure website is that for any site that you have, you actually get a second companion site, which is more of an administrative site. And the URL is the same as that of the site, except there's this SCM token here, and it's using HTTPS. And that is the site that runs this thing called Kudu. And unlike the regular site, unlike the primary site, this one is always authenticated such that the owner of the site is the only person who can access it. And it runs in the same general sandbox as the site, which means it can access the files and the environment variable, making it a great place for admin tools. So let's go and show you this a little bit. So what I'll do is, just to go a bit cross-browser, I'll do this part in Chrome. Everything Kudu actually works fine in IE, but I just like to use multiple browsers for the sake of it. So I'll add this SCM token, and here I need to log in. And I'll show you the kind of things that you can do from here. So the UI is somewhat basic UI, is stuff that is not nearly as polished as what you see in the portal. And some of these tools will eventually make it into the portal. So one thing you have here first is environment. You can see a bunch of information about the system. We see it's running on a 64-bit system. The process is 32-bit. It's a one-processor system. That's because I'm running a small instance, etc. I get all the connection string, environment variables, a bunch of all the HTTP headers, server variable, a bunch of things that can be quite useful when you're investigating an issue. But probably the most interesting part of the Kudu console, at least the most popular, is this console, which gives you at the same time a console window and a file manager. So if we go in here, we can go into this site folder where we see I'm sorry, I made a small mistake here because what I'll do here is that I'm going to swap here one more time. And the reason for that I had deployed, I had swapped my site into production. So the deployments were actually now in the production site. But by swapping back, if I do this, I should now be talking about the site that actually has the repository and the deployment. So once I'm here, the kind of thing I can run in this console, I can run git commands. I could do git log -3, and we can see what we just did. I can very easily upload files. Let me create a temporary folder here to do that. Hello, I go in here, and let me go to my C drive demo folder. I can drag this hello.htm. You can even drag full folders. And a very interesting feature as well is if you have a zip file, if I was to just go and grab the zip file and drop it here, I would get the zip file. But that's not necessarily interesting. A more interesting thing to do is to take this zip file, and I'm going to drop it in this special area that says, don't just drop it, but unzip it. So now I have this folder and everything in it. And I can also do the reverse action by clicking on this arrow here and saying download. This is going to take this server-side folder and download a zip file that has everything in it. And that's it here. Other things that you can do here is in terms of folders. So right now, this icon represents the user's persisted file, the site's persisted file. So that's where the web root is, the repository is there. The one on the right gives you basically access to the system drive. So this is, of course, read-only, but you can see you could go in program file x86 and look at just random stuff that's in there. And the middle one shows the temporary files that are used by this site. So we see like the IIS temporary site, there is temporary ASP.NET file. There is also, if you're familiar with IIS, you probably know about application host.config. This is the application host.config that gets generated. We actually have a very, very basic viewer editor as part of this console. It's nothing fancy, but it can be useful to make quick tweaks to files. Other things in the Kudu console, these are just links to REST API. So really, this is a UI. I happen to have a REST plugin for Chrome. I'm sorry, a JSON plugin that's showing my deployments here. So that was an introduction to Kudu console. We'll get back to it later for some other pieces of it. So Kudu, basically the way to look at it is that it's a feature, it's a piece of Azure website. But unlike the rest of Azure website, Kudu is being developed as an open source project, which you can check out. The features they're implementing in Kudu include the Git and Mercurial support. There's Dropbox is in there as well, logging, web jobs, a bunch of things that are running in that context. And the Kudu project is open source and does accept contribution, and we've had a few external contributions there. So if you see something that you'd like to do differently, you absolutely can send a pull request to that. And Kudu is what we call a site extension, which is a somewhat new concept that I'll get back into in a bit. And as I said, some of the UI, if you're wondering, like, why is that UI like not in the portal? Well, it really should be, some of it, and it will be there eventually. In fact, the portal has an initial version of the console window, if you've seen the demo of the preview portal, but it's not nearly as advanced as what we have here. So the next thing I want to discuss is that there are websites. So typically, people look at the portal. But if you can go far beyond the portal, Visual Studio has a deep integration as well. We have command line interface, both a cross-platform version and a PowerShell version. You can call Azure API directly, and you can even use IIS Manager to connect directly to your site. So of course, you find it funny, me working in Azure website, I'm kind of putting that in the center of the world. I'm sure, the Azure portal people would put themselves in the middle with everything else around, but in the context of administering an Azure website, this makes sense. So I'll talk a little bit more about the command line interface, which is essentially an alternate way to manage your site. So as I said, there's PowerShell and a cross-platform version written in Node. And at the same time, I'll introduce the concept of custom deployment script for the Git-based deployment, which lets you take control over your deployment steps and make all kind of tweaks anywhere from big to small. And for instance, it can be used to run tests. And I have a sample out there. But first, I'll show you a quick demo of how to use this. And so we have, just to show you the PowerShell one first, if I do in PowerShell get command, Azure website, this gives you a bunch of commands, so you can see you can do most things. You can create a site, delete a site, restart a site, do all of those things. That's the PowerShell version. The cross-platform version is just called Azure. As you install it, that's an NPM package. It's written in Node. If I type Azure site, I'll get a bunch more info about this. And here specifically, I'm going to use a command called deployment script, which lets me generate a custom deployment script for my site. So here I'm again getting help to see what I need to do. So what I need to tell it is that my project type is an ASP.NET project, and I'm going to point it to my chproj file, and also give it the path to my SLN file, my solution. And just doing that, it's going to generate a couple files, which we'll see here. There's a dot deployment, which basically tells it the command to run is deploy CMD, and that's the command. So what I'll do to make it slightly more interesting is I'll actually make a small modification. So there's a fair amount of content in this file, but the one you really care about is what's here on the deployment, where you'd see it's restoring the NuGet packages, it's building, and it's copying over to the dub roots. In essence, that's what it's doing. So now to keep it simple, oops, what was that? So I'll just add an echo, hi from custom script, just to show that I can type. And I'll commit that stuff. So again, I'm just pushing to GitHub, which will further deploy to Azure. And if we go back to the portal here, we should see on the deployment that a new deployment is happening. And once it's done, we'll ask it to display the deployment steps. And in there, we should see the line that we have customized. It's taking its time. Let me see if I can convince it by... Not exactly sure what's happening here. Let's see if my site is healthy. Yes. Okay. We'll ignore that part. So here I would have gotten basically the deployment log that looks like this. And within this, we would have seen the command that I had typed. I'm not sure why this deployment is not completing. So back to the slides. The next thing I want to discuss is a concept of post-deployment notification. And the idea is a deployment happens within your Azure site, and you want to tell the outside world about it. And it could be anywhere from your own server that takes the notification. And the payload of that notification gives you all the details about that commit. And that can actually be hooked up to external site like Zapier, which I will show you next. So the diagram here is, this is the same I showed you earlier, and now we're adding the fact that whenever you deploy to staging, it's going to inform some external source, which could be Zapier, which could then send you a text message or post to Twitter, Facebook, anything that they support. And if you're not familiar to Zapier, I'll show you this site. So let's move to that demo. So this guy is quite sick here. Let me refresh the portal. And at the same time, I'll go in here and show you this concept of webhooks that I can add. So there's a site that I like to use. Anyone familiar with request bin? It's a very useful site to test those. You create what's called a bin, and it gives you a URL, and then it records everything that comes to this URL. So if I just access this URL here. And then I come back, it's going to tell me that, oh, someone made a GET request to this and sending those headers and such. So this is a good way to test APIs. So I'm going to take this same URL and paste it as a hook for a post-deployment hook for this site. And now, well, evidently something went poorly here, but we'll dismiss it and yes. Let me redeploy this previous one. And what should happen, if the site is not hosted, okay, is that at the end of this deployment, in this case I cheated, I didn't do a full deployment from GitHub, I kind of redeployed the previous one, but it's very much the same thing. If I go back to my request bin, we see that after the deployment, it sent a body that tells us, okay, who made the commit and all that stuff, the text of the commit, whether the status was successful, and so on. So in order to make more interesting use of that, I'm going to use this site called Zapier, and I can create a new Zap and choose as a trigger Azure websites, and I'll tell it to, I want it to be fired when a new deployment is made. You can also do it whenever a web job is fired as well. That's something we just added. And when that happens, I'd like it to call my phone, which I'll turn on. And so the next step is I need to connect to an Azure site. The way this is done is we go to this configuration page here, and we grab this URL here, and we just paste it into here. So it's slightly half manual, but still relatively simple. And now Zapier is testing the connection, and it's happy. And I tell it, OK, I want to call my phone. I could add custom filters if I only want to get the notification if it's a failure or such. Skipping that step and say, OK, the deployment is done. Status was. And the beauty, if I click here, it knows about the schema of the notification. So here it's actually talking to the Azure site to get a sample of data from which you can get the schema. And I can say the status was status. Message was message. So let's leave it at that. So I just need to complete my Zap here and name it build demo. And now I'm done on this side. And what I'm going to do is the same that I did before, go back to my site and cause it to cause a deployment again. So in the interest of time, I'll again just go and redeploy this previous deployment here. And then sometimes it can take a minute. I should be getting a phone call from Zapier telling me that something happened. So while that's happening, we'll move on to the next thing, which I'm going to discuss a bit Visual Studio integration. You've probably seen it quite a few times in previous demos. But we have tools to do log streaming, debugging, deployment, and you can also access the files of your sites. So let's switch to VS here. And the beauty is because my VS is connected to my account. Oh, here it is. So let's see what it has to tell me.
OK, the deployment is done. Status was success. Message was build demo.
OK. Thank you. So the first thing I'll show you is this concept of log streaming. I can take my staging site here. If I find it, I need to refresh because I had that from before. And my hello site should show up somewhere on this list. It needs to relog me in. And come on. Oh, it's still refreshing. And now I have the staging site to which I can say view streaming logs. What that does is if you look at my controller, I have a few things that does some tracing. And if I go back to my site, so the staging site, and I'll refresh a few times, and you get the messages. You only get error because that's the default logging level. If I want more, I can do view settings and change from debug from error only to be everything. So I'll say verbose. And now if I go back and make a few requests, I should be getting everything. So you see we get all the things I was tracing here. So next thing I want to discuss is deployment. So far I've been doing a Git workflow, but I want to show you how easily you can do web deploy from here as well. So I can take this site and say publish. And again, because it knows about my account, it knows which sites that I have. Here I don't want to deploy over my Git site because I don't want to kind of cross Git and web deploy. So I use a different target that I have prepared for that. And it's called MVC app web deploy. And the only thing I'll change is I'll make it deploy debug bit so I can show you debugging right after. So here it's deploying to that other site. Okay, now I can turn that off. And now I want to show you debugging. So I'll put a breakpoint here. I can say this hello build, actually not this one, the site we just deployed to. I want to attach the debugger. And I can click on about, and I have a breakpoint here. And just to show you that it's real, I can go in here and sort of hack the message. Hack me. And if I let it go, we should see that, right? And to show you, this really is the site running in Azure. So it's quite an amazing thing. We're in Visual Studio, remote debugging that site almost the same way as if it was a local site. So other things that we can do within this VS UI, we can actually see the files. So if I go and change some files here, I could go to the views and make some changes. Index, change from VS. And that's it. It's saved. And that's actually my other site. Here, if I browse to it, we'll see my change. Oops, sorry about that. So next, I'd like to discuss tools that we have in Kudu that help debug process, thread, and memory issues. So we have a REST API in Kudu that gives you all that information. We also have a little UI in Kudu to visualize it. And then you can also download some DOM files, which then you can use Visual Studio or WinDBG to debug. So I'll show you that. Going back to, let me close Zapier. Actually, I'll just delete it for now, so it doesn't keep calling me. And if I go to this Process Explorer, let me actually duplicate the tab so I can at the same time be in here, and I'll do crazy things like launch Notepad, which you definitely shouldn't be doing from a web app, and run another CMD. If I go back to the Process Explorer, it's showing me all my processes. I don't want Notepad here, I can kill it. If I go to W3WP, which is where the interesting stuff is, and I hit Properties, I get this window where I can see all the various memory CPU counters for my process running in Azure. I can see all the file handles. I can see the threads. I can click on the thread and get further information. So, I mean, think of it as a process, like the client-side Process Explorer, obviously not as rich, but in essence, it's the same idea running in your Azure site. And also, yeah, you can find a handle, like if your file is locked and you don't know what it is, I type ASP and I see out of all the processes running, which one have that file locked. That can be very handy if you see that a file is locked by something and you don't know what. Other thing I can do is I can download a memory dump of this thing. So if I do, you can get a mini dump or a full dump. And here, I'm just going to copy the path to it, and I can literally open it in WinDBG, and analyze my memory dump. I can look at the thread, do stuff like that. So it can be pretty advanced to do. Normally it should break. Here it is. And I can do stuff like show me all the thread. I know it's a little small, but I can make it bigger. Yeah, and we should see some .NET thread somewhere in there, but yeah, it's taking a while. Okay, I'm not going to wait for it. But how many of you use WinDBGs on occasions? Or okay, a bunch of you. And you can also use VS, in fact, to open those same dump files. And here it is. So here we clearly see a .NET thread here that has some of the stacks, maybe in our controllers and such. So next, I want to talk a little bit about WebJob. So WebJob, there are two main ways to deploy them. If you go to the Azure portal, you can upload a zip file, or you can make it be part of your deployment of your app. So I'm not a very big fan myself of the first step because it is hard to do in a consistent manner. If you redeploy the same site, you have to manually redo the zip. But if you do the other way, it's actually quite well integrated. And the way you do this is I'm just going to create a new console app. Just give it its default name, and I'll keep it super simple. And now I can go in here and say, I'm looking at the website, and I say I want to add a web job to it, and it knows the list of console apps that are in the same solution. So it offers me that list, asks me for the type of job, and I'm saying I want a triggered job, and that's all I need to do. So now if oh yeah, it's installing some web job package, and it's done. So if I go here and try to commit all that, so there's a whole bunch of new files. And I'll push it. What we should see is if I go back to my site here, which one was it? Hello build. Actually, it's hello build. I want the deployment, the staging slot for that. And so first, the deployment should be happening, except maybe we're hitting the same issue as earlier where I'm somehow not able to deploy, or not. And if I go on the web job, magically we should see the job, the little console app that we wrote being live here. And I can go and run it once or twice, and then go to this page here, which has me log in again. Because this is actually served from the Kudu site again. So it's kind of one more Kudu service that has the logic to do those logs. And we can see the two invocation, and if we click on it, we can see the details of what it did. So this one is a triggered job. I could have done a continuous job as well. So next thing I want to discuss is using this thing called Monaco, Visual Studio Online. How many of you have seen this? Okay, most of you. So this is the existing slide to which I'm now adding what I view as the right way to use Monaco. Because Monaco can be used in all kind of ways. You could use it to kind of hack on your production site, on your staging site. But the way I like to look at it is that it's really just one more dev box that happens to be in the cloud. It is not a way to hack your live site. It should be viewed as a client more than as a server, if that makes sense. And let me show you some of that. Closing a few things. If I go, I actually have a site that is prepared for that, which is my demo dev box. And if I go to the dashboard, I already have this one prepared to use Visual Studio Online, which itself is running in the SCM site as well. And what I can do in here is, first of all, I need to git pull, so I get the new stuff that's been added. And you really should think of this as the same stuff that you do on your local machine. Like if I do a git log -3, we should see all the changes that I just made. I can go in this index page here, build demo, and hi, Monaco. They have nice UI in here as well to commit the changes. So this index.html, let me close this thing here. You say, okay, yes, I changed this line. I'm happy with that. I want to stage it. And Monaco change. I'm committing the change. And I'm pushing the change to GitHub. So this is really exactly the same stuff that I have been doing all day from my local machine, except I'm doing it from here because I'm possibly on a machine that doesn't have Visual Studio, that doesn't have the tools. I could be on a tablet, on a Mac, and I can do those things. Obviously, it's not as rich an experience as Visual Studio, but it's a good substitute when that's all you have. And if you use Node, actually, it's pretty rich. For .NET, it's still somewhat limited. And now going back to this site, if I go to deployment, we should see the new change that we made from Monaco. And one thing I didn't show you is that when I'm in here, I can actually run my site. And if I make changes, see that's what's nice about it, is that you're not coding completely blind, meaning that if I was to go to, say, a controller and make a change that wouldn't compile, I could actually go to the command line and I could do ms build from here. And it would tell me, oh, your site is not good. You have a problem. So I wouldn't need to go as far as pushing. So it's really kind of exactly the same as you would do on your local machine. And now if I go to here, I can say, OK, this change no good. I want to revert it. And I should be able to go back and do ms build. Let me see if I have time to do this one. Yeah, I'll show you very quickly using the Azure API programmatically. The way you do this is there is a NuGet package. And I'll jump straight to the demo in the interest of time. So it's pretty simple. Basically, you have to download your cert. And I have a very small sample here that has, OK. So we have the app setting. In my app setting, I have the path to my PFX, the password, the subscription. And it's just a few calls to get the certificate. Let me make that a little bit bigger for you. And I create this object called a website management client. And from that, I can do things like list of all the sites in my web spaces. And from each web space, list the sites. When I say web space, it more or less means region a little bit, but not exactly. These are all empty web spaces. And these are the ones where I have sites. This is the one for our demo today. So that's just showing you that you can, in addition to the command line and the portal and VS, you can also use the programmatic way of calling into Azure. Next thing is IIS Manager. I'll show you that one. Where have I lost my, OK. So IIS Manager actually lets you connect to a site. I can do connect to a site. I think it has the name cache. So I'll connect to the one where I had Monaco running. And you authenticate the same way you would to the SCM service. And if all goes well, it should tell me that it finds my site. If it doesn't go well, it hangs. I will just try again. OK, so that one is not going to happen. But I'll tell you, basically, I would get the usual iNet Manager UI. Maybe I know what I did wrong. I forgot the 443. I have to tell it that I want to use SSL. That most likely is the problem. And sure enough, saved. So for instance, I can edit the default document. So let me add, I had actually added this hello.htm. Let me add another one, hello build.htm in the default document. And if I go back to Monaco here, where was my, I have too many tabs open. And I look at web config and close this. And look at that, the change that I just made from my iNet Manager is showing up right here. I can also do the reverse, like say this hello, I don't want it. And if I go back to here and do a refresh, it's gone. So you can look at this as a kind of a remote editor for your web config file using all the fancy tools that are built into iNet Manager. So Pretty cool stuff. And last but not least, what I want to discuss is the concept of site extension, which is probably the most interesting thing that I'm discussing today. And site extension are things, Kudu is itself a site extension. There are things that only the site owner can access, unlike the real site, which is meant to be consumed by others. But site extensions have access to the files of your site and the environment. So they are great to write kind of administration tools like Kudu or like Monaco. And we've seen those two already. But the beauty is that you're not limited to just using the built-in one. You can write and even share your own. And this is still a work in progress. It's still very preview-ish, but you'll get the idea of where we're going with that. So this is sort of a general map. Like in blue, I have the Azure website in the wide sense of the term. In purple, I have specifically the user site. And that's running on the foo.azurewebsites.net. Of course, it could be a custom name as well. And now I'm adding this concept of pre-installed site extensions. They're the ones that come with every site. And there is Kudu and Monaco. And even Web Deploy is going to become a site extension very soon. Web Jobs is in there as well. But what if I want more? So the bring your own model, there's two ways of doing that. You can literally go and upload your site extension to your site using say the zip upload I showed you earlier. But the yet way better model is to install from this new gallery that we're putting together. It's still in a very early state, but you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. So if I go back to here, and I look at site extensions, I can connect. I have none installed now, because the pre-installed one don't count. And here, we have a bunch of file extensions. We don't have that many. We just have a few to get things started. And I'm going to try this one. This is the one, if you were in Near session last night, that he had an unfortunate problem. It should have worked. It didn't for some technicality. But let's see. So this is the extension that is supposed to take the bits of my current site and replicate it in other sites. So let's just run the extension, which has this nice map of the world and all. And while it does that, to make things interesting, I'm going to go and create some sites in other regions. So let's call it target in Japan. I'll put that one somewhere in Japan. And let's do two of them because we feel lucky. I'll do one in Europe. And once that's done, what I'll do is I'll take, so target Japan is done. Where'd it go? Okay, Europe. I'll download the published profile. Save. Okay, and I'll do the same for the Japan site. Okay, and now I can go back to here, browse to the download folder. There's Japan, shows up in Japan. Here is Europe. So it's nice, we have this graphic, but what is it actually doing? What it's doing is that it's taking the bits that are in my site here on the West Coast and automatically replicating it to those regions. So if I go, let's try to actually run those sites. I'm going to run my Japan site. You can see the target Japan here. At the same time, I'll run the Europe one. So, and here we are. There's this high Monaco that we just did, and this one should show exactly the same. To do just an additional change to show you what that's like, I can go back to our friendly Kudu console, and I'll just kind of hack a little change just to show you how quickly things propagate. If I go under the home views, lacking originality, I keep going back to the same place. Replicate me. I'll save it. And now, let's see. That's my Japan site. It has it. Europe site. It has it. So that's site replicate. Thank you. But really the key is not so much about this particular site extension. What I want to really discuss is the concept of site extension, how those things can be written, and the value that they can have. So I'll go and install a really, really simple site extension that is better to explain the concept. So there is this thing called file counter. And every time I have to kind of restart the site to make the extension actually available. And it's a pretty silly extension. All it does is it counts the number of files that are in the under www folder. And if I go to the console to quickly show you the files that got deployed, like where are those extensions within my site, they are in the site extensions folder. And there's the two that I installed. And file counter here. So writing a site extension is actually incredibly simple because even this XDT file, you don't have to generate that. That gets generated automatically. In this case, the only true file you have to write is a website. Basically, a site extension is a normal website. And in this particular case, what is this website doing? Well, it's looking at the environment variable home /site/www, which basically is saying, OK, this is where the user's files are, the deployed files, and it's just expanding the environment variable and just counting the files and displaying that. So obviously, it's not very useful, but it demonstrates the concept that this site extension has full access to the same drive, the same storage that the site itself has access to. And that's exactly the same thing. When you use Kudu and you do a Git deployment, it's using the same basic strategy. It's running under this same SCM site. It has access to the files, and it's using that to create a repository and then deploy it to the www. It's much, much more complex than this, but at high level, it's the same principle. Another one that's kind of interesting to look at is I have another site deployed here, which is a WordPress site. So sorry, let me do a little bit of tab cleanup because it's getting out of control. And I'll run this WordPress site. And at the same time, I'll run the SCM site for this. So same deal. So this is my WordPress site running. And I'll go and install a site extension from the gallery. And we have a site extension for PHPMyAdmin, which I can install. I believe Nir demoed that yesterday, but doing it in WordPress adds another little twist. So what it's doing now, one thing I didn't mention is that the gallery that's hosting those packages is basically an instance of the NuGet gallery. Because under the cover, it's using the same NuGet technology to package things. So the way you create site extensions is the same way you create NuGet packages. So we're kind of reusing everything that they've provided, except we have 7 packages and they have 100,000, but same idea. So I'll do the restart site here. And I can run this site extension. Are you guys familiar with PHPMyAdmin? It's sort of the very popular tool to administer MySQL databases. And here we can see all the tables. And just to do something fun, let's actually open this post table. And this has all my posts. I can go and edit it. Change from site extension. And here somewhere there should be a save button. I think that's it. Is it? Go. Yes. And I refresh. And here we are. So this kind of shows 2 angles of site extension. The first was very much about file access, and the second one is about environment. Like the beauty is when I went to this site extension, I did not need to tell it, oh, this is the connection string to my MySQL. The reason it knew is because it's running in the same context. And in fact, we can see that if I look at the environment, somewhere in here, we should see the MySQL connection. And yes, I'm giving away all the credentials. This is a temporary database. It won't be here long. So you have a 10 minutes to hack it. One final thing I will show you is just a little bit deeper about what the site extension, this topic is a little bit more advanced and it's maybe optional. I want to show you back in the Kudu console, if I look at the generated application host.config for this site, and if we look into the binding, here we see, let me actually grab that into Notepad. It'll be a little easier to read. All right, so these are the site bindings. That's how sites get configured in RIS. And we see we actually have two sites here. There's the main site for my blog, and there's this tilde1 site, which is the site that hosts the site extensions. And this has, Kudu is running off of there. So Kudu is at the root, and that's pointing to the program file site extension Kudu, a certain version. Monaco is the same. Monaco is not enabled on this site, so you wouldn't see it. But if you look at phpMyAdmin, so that is the site extension. It is basically an application within this site. And where is it pointing? It's pointing, unlike the others that are pointing to pre-installed program file, this one is pointing to space that is within the user files. So moving on. So that's most of what I had. The quick takeaways is that Azure website, is a lot more than a simple, site hosters. There's a lot of interesting deployment workflows and a lot of tools that can help you be successful with Azure websites. Site extensions are the new hot thing, so we're not completely ready. I was hoping by now, we could announce the actual gallery where people can publish. We're not completely ready for that, but it's a matter of hopefully a month, after which anyone can write a site extension, host it, and anybody else can install it. So very much the NuGet model or the Visual Studio V6 model, both of which are very successful ecosystem. So my hope is that if this catches up, many people will be writing such thing, and the value of Azure website will increase quickly, because this admin tool is no longer something that just Microsoft is writing, but will get contributions. And of course, give us feedback. And the last thing I want to mention are the related sessions. So the first one is the session that Nir gave last night. I'll mention it for people watching online, what's new in Azure websites. The next session is coming up at 10:30. So if you're interested in Azure website, I highly recommend that you make that one. It's about architecting massive scale, ready for business web apps. So it's all about how you take a site and make it scalable, first within one region and then worldwide. And Yohai from my team is giving that talk. And if you're interested to hear more about Monaco, there is a talk that is at 2 p.m., which is the last time slot, I think, of the conference. And Chris Diaz is giving that. So that should be a very interesting talk as well. Thank you very much. So remember to fill up the evaluation. And if you have any questions, feel free to walk to the mic, and I'll be happy to. Yes, you want to walk to the mic? Repeat the question, yes.
Yes, hi. I've got a question about site extensions.
Yes.
It looks really promising. And how do you, if you have multiple servers and you want to have them installed on all of the servers, how do you configure to get the same site extensions installed on any server?
That's a great question. First of all, we don't really talk about servers as much as we talk about sites. Today, there is not a great story for it, but we are thinking about making the installation of site extension be part of the deployment of a site, such that you could declare that you want XYZ extension, and you would either git push or do this kind of motion, and they would just come down automatically.
Okay, thanks.
Still work in progress, though, but.
David, are the site extensions going to be part or distributed with the Azure Pack as well, or are they only going to be on Azure websites?
That is a good question. I do not know. I don't think this has been decided yet. What do you think, Nir? Yeah. Eventually. It may take a little bit longer.
How are the additional slots billed for staging and testing and whatnot?
The slots are basically regular websites. Like when you have a site and a slot, for all practical purposes, you have two sites.
Okay, so if you set up one site and then a staging slot, you're going to be paying for both of those? Are you paying for the same configuration for both of them? The scaling and setup and everything?
Well,
Or can you scale them differently?
You cannot scale them differently because as you swap, you typically expect to keep the same scalability level.
Gotcha.
But the thing to keep in mind is if you have a standard instance and you have multiple sites on there, they all end up on the same instance. So you.
The slots to be part of different.
I see. Yes, and you're saying like, so today, so first of all, the slot feature is only supported in a standard mode, and they are always running on the same VM, so it doesn't cost extra, but on the downside, you may think, well, I don't want my staging thing there. Nir is just telling me that eventually we'll have the ability to actually place the staging site on different VMs. At that point, of course, you will have to pay for the extra. You know, it comes down to VMs.
Okay,
right?
gotcha. Thank you.
Yes.
So excellent talk, David. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Two questions. When you were going into the process explorer and killing some processes, that was those are the processes associated with that application domain to that site. I mean,
yes, that was the list of processes that were running in the context of this one site only.
So that's the standard mode we are talking about.
No, not necessarily.
So so if I'm in a shared mode, I could not be killing off processes that belong to someone else.
Absolutely, because it's all very well sandboxed. Meaning that if you could be running a free instance site and there could be 100 sites running on the machine, you will see only your processes and nothing else.
Right. Okay. And the other question I have is the site extension idea can be applied to. Am I thinking of this correctly? If I wanted to provide my users an admin capability for my Azure website, right?
Yes.
I want my administrators to go in and look at a log or do something. Site extension is the guidance to achieve that?
I think, yes, it is a good approach. One thing that we don't have today, but we're adding later, is a concept of role-based access.
Yeah.
That will let you designate another person as a co-administrator for just one site. As opposed to today, we only have the concept of co-admin at the subscription level, which is sometimes too strong.
Right.
But we will support that.
And one last thing is, I've run into problems with if I get my if I do a NuGet package and then deploy it to Azure website or mobile services, which is based on a similar thing. If I include let's say I'm building a mobile service with some Node code and I bring in some third-party modules. If the path becomes a certain size, then I run into difficulties with the Kudu sync.
Well, I mean, we run on Windows OS, so we are limited by the standard Windows limitation. Sure. The path can only be 260 characters, right. But there shouldn't be a limitation beyond that. And presumably, if you run into that, you're likely to run into the same thing on your local machine.
Right. You have to, and I have had to go into the console, and how you bring in a package, it brings in a package, and that nesting levels throws you off. So you have to go
Maybe
back.
you're talking about Node and NPM, right?
Yes.
I see. Okay,
yes.
okay. So yes, because for NuGet, it's not usually an issue.
I should have said NPM.
Yes. For NPM, yes, absolutely. It has been an issue because it's true that on Windows, we have this 260 character path length limit, while on the Mac, there is no such limit. So sometimes you could be developing on your local machine with those extremely long paths and not have problem. And then as you push to us, there is an issue. So. Okay. That is something that is a problem. It's actually a hard problem because the path length limit is pretty deep in Windows.
And whenever I've had that problem, you can go into the console and readjust your packages to solve it.
You can. There are workarounds for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do those staging sites count against our 10 freebies with our Azure account?
Well, the feature is only supported in standard mode, so you simply cannot use staging sites in free mode. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Hi, David. Could you deploy a Windows service as well as a web job?
No. It's more, it runs into the kind of same sandbox as the site, so it doesn't have the ability to do machine impactful things. So maybe someday we'll get into that kind of deeper integration, but today you cannot do OS level modification of that kind.
For .NET sites, you do a NuGet package restore on publish.
That's correct.
Is there any plan to do a similar thing for Python sites?
Yeah, we should discuss. You know, this has not come up. I mean, to be honest, I don't think we've had that many Python users yet. It's more as people start using it and run into problem, we want to get feedback and do the right thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you have multiple staging sites for things like continuous integration, then QA, and then production?
Yes, you can. Actually, it's a fairly new feature. I don't know if you remember when I created the staging site, it actually asked me for the name of the slot. Until recently, it wasn't doing that. It would just give you one. But now you can name them. I think there's a limit of 5, which... Huh?
It's coming soon.
It's coming soon. Okay.
Coming soon?
Yes. Okay. Maybe right now you can still only have one, but very soon you'll be able to have more.
Thank you.
Hey, with the site extensions, are you going to be able to write in any language which is deployable to an Azure website?
Very good question, and the answer is yes, because in the end, they run as kind of regular sites, so anything that is supported by Azure websites will work. And in fact, Monaco is written in Node. The other extension I showed is written in .NET. And PHPMyAdmin, you can guess what that's written in.
Following on from that, like with a Node website, Node typically uses NPM, but site extensions is going to be NuGet. How would if I have a dependency within my site extension, which is a Node one, how can I pull it down?
So when I said site extension are using NuGet, they're more using NuGet as a low-level packaging format. It has nothing to do with the NuGet that you use for the DLL dependencies. So in the situation that you described, you would simply include all of the relevant Node packages and zip them up. You know, the NuGet file for the package is pretty much a zip file. So we would not be running NPM automatically for you in that case. So you would package that as part of your extension.
Cool, thanks.
You're welcome.
With web deploy, it looks like it only deploys the changes from the files, so the files were changed. We had some problems with that it didn't deploy the files right well. Can you force to delete all the files from the website with a new deploy?
Yeah, there is a switch on there. At the time you do web deploy, I believe there is a checkbox that lets you say start with a clean site.
Yeah, all right.
Yes, I can find it. I thought there was. Well, I can look. We can look together afterwards if you're interested, but I'm pretty sure there is such a checkbox. Yeah.
Checkbox wasn't really doing it what I thought.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If we could take all the remaining questions outside, we have another session coming in. Thank you again for coming.
Locked. Yes.